Hello and welcome to the Astranti pre-scene analysis video for the February 2017 strategic case study exam on reality TV company Evestar. So before we begin, I'm just going to start by telling you a little bit about myself and a bit about how we are going to approach the pre-scene and the things we're going to be looking for. So my name is Peter Steffer. I am the director of CIMA here at Astranti. I've been with the company since 2013, and during that time I've written and marked many of the mock exams that we provide, and I've also written mocks for other tuition providers. I've also written many of the study texts that you may have used. And if you see in the bottom left hand corner there, my Facebook page, on the run up to the exam I'll be posting all kinds of hints and tips. So now let's take a look at the video series themselves. So for starters, I'm going to go through the pre-scene section by section, picking up on all the key points, the things that you should be looking for, the things you should be pulling out of the text and analysing. I'll then be applying them to the case itself, what they mean for the company and what it means for the industry that it operates in. Applying certain business models to it, ones that you may have learnt in your objective test studies, and the likely exam issues. So looking at it and thinking, based on this information, a likely question is X. And also other just hints and tips, general things that will help you gain extra marks in the exam. I'll then go on to my strategic analysis video, which will be taking the pre-scene as a whole and summarising it and applying it into lots of different key business models and key business theories before rounding up with my top 10 issues. So these are the most likely things I think are going to come up in the actual exam. So how's it going to work? As I said, I'm going to go through it section by section. I'm going to assume that you haven't read the pre-scene. I'm going to assume that this is all new to you and we are going through it together for the first time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to make notes yourself. So I'll stop the videos at the start of each one and ask you to make notes on a certain number of pages, and then we'll go back and review it together. And as I've said, at the end we'll go through a full strategic analysis and top 10 issues. So first of all, some key things that you should be aware of. Now, the pre-scene is the context of the exam. It's the context of the company that is being examined. The background information, as it were. So once you've read the pre-scene, this should all be forming a foundation in your mind. And when you go into the actual exam, all the unseen questions that come up in the actual exam, you should be answering them based on this base context from the pre-scene. But it's worth noting that you shouldn't write anything based on the pre-scene. And that's because you're not necessarily going to be tested on something that's in the pre-scene. You'll be tested on the unseen material that you are given in the exam. If that unseen material is nothing to do with the material in the pre-scene, then you shouldn't be using the pre-scene material to answer the question. You must always use the unseen material. Having said that, you should always be thinking about the pre-scene material. Now, you're given this in advance for a reason. You're supposed to learn it and you're supposed to gain as much understanding as you can about the company so that you can use this information in the actual exam. So let's begin. Now, in the first sentence here, we can see the description of our role, the description of the role that we are playing in the strategic case study exam. So we can see here that we are a senior manager at Evestar, a large company based in Thailand, which is quoted on the Thailand Stock Exchange. Now, when you see that a company is listed on the stock exchange, this is both a strength and an opportunity because, of course, it's a way in which they can raise additional financing, which private companies cannot do. And raising money on the stock market is a way in which companies can raise a lot of finance. And the good thing about equity finances is that it does not have to be paid back in the same way as debt financing, or at least not paid back in the short term. However, what you do have to do if you have shareholders, is there may be an expectation that you will be paying dividends. Now, the problem with dividends and paying dividends is the signaling effect of paying dividends. Now, what the signaling effect is where you are communicating to the market that you are paying out dividends. Now, to some shareholders, this may be a good thing, particularly ones who are perhaps retired and looking for a source of income. However, to others who perhaps have well-paid jobs and are using them as an additional investment, they will be looking to see the share price rise because dividends have quite a high tax on them. And another thing about the signaling effect is that it perhaps illustrates to the market that you do not have any plans for investment because you're paying out money rather than reinvesting it in the company. So you could be saying to the market that we don't have any ideas, so we're just going to pay out dividends. And of course, by paying out dividends, you are taking money out of the company, and therefore the company itself may be less valuable. And of course, there are additional rules and regulations, higher standards of rules and regulations that have to be abided by public companies as opposed to private companies. Now, the next sentence here focuses more on your role, the role that we are playing in the strategic case study exam. So we report directly to the board, advising them on special projects and strategic matters. So, strategic matters, that flows more to your E3 and your P3 topics. So, advising them on strategy, future planning, and also risk management. And of course, we are advising the board directly. Therefore, the board are going to use the material, use our responses to their questions to make strategic decisions. Therefore, our input needs to be strategic. It needs to be thinking about the long term. We need to be thinking about making firm recommendations. We don't just want to give them the bare bones information and then try and say to them, there's the information, make your decision based on that. They will be looking to us to give firm, solid recommendations that they will then put into action. And of course, dealing with special one-off projects also ties back to the E2 material on project management. And it's worth noting that you may be thinking that E2 material, this is the strategic exam, but CIMA considers everything that you will have studied up to this point to be considered assumed knowledge, background knowledge, and therefore material from E2 is acceptable as an examinable topic. We're also told here that the country, the nation of Thailand, uses the International Financial Reporting Standards, and therefore we can make an assumption that Evestar applies to these standards. The standards apply to Evestar, and we can assume that they abide by them. And finally, we get some information here about the currency in use in Thailand, which is the T dollar. Now, whenever you think about currency, you should always be thinking about peso and the economy. So we also have things like inflation, interest rates, and exchange rates to think about. So when we think about interest rates, we should be thinking about how expensive debt financing is. Because of course, if we take out a loan, we have to pay the interest. And interest, unlike dividend payments, is not optional. We have to pay our interest rates. So if the interest rates in Thailand is particularly high at the moment, then that will affect whether or not we consider debt financing as a suitable way of raising finance. Also, with exchange rates, we have to think about whether licensing our programs overseas is more expensive. And now we can hedge against this perhaps by leading or lagging payments. That's where you either push back or push forward payment paid or payment received so that you take advantage of exchange rates, or by always invoicing in one particular currency, usually the home currency. It also has an impact on your threats from abroad. So whether it's easier for foreign companies to invest in your country, for foreign TV production companies to sell programs to the Thailand television companies as well. So interest rates, exchange rates, can often be a threat or an opportunity. Because if it benefits you, there are opportunities. If they don't benefit you, they are threats. Now, on to the reality television industry within Thailand. Now, first thing we can see here is that Thailand is the largest producer of reality television in Thailand. So, of course, that positions us as the market leader. And therefore, our strategy should be tied with maintaining this position, with consolidating this position. Don't rest on our laurels simply because we are the market leader. What that means is that other companies, smaller companies, will be gunning for us. They will want to be the market leader. All the market followers will be trying to challenge us for that position. And that raises the competitiveness of the industry. And that's also a strength of our business, that we are the largest, the biggest, we have the most revenue. And we should be able to utilize that position, utilize that strong brand name of Evestar to perhaps reduce the buyer power of the television channels. And also to help when pitching new programs or with raising revenue required for new television programs. So what is reality TV? Well, reality television here is the generic title for programs that are largely unscripted and put participants in real-life situations that may be simulated. Now, what this means is that the costs are likely to be lower than your more scripted television sitcoms, because a lot of the costs involved in producing these programs comes from the production, from the writing, etc. Whereas in this case, often in reality TV shows, you just have regular people who perhaps are not being paid like big Hollywood actors, and they are just being filmed, going around doing real life things. And it's unscripted, so we have perhaps a significant reduction in costs compared to scripted television programs. But under that heading of reality television, there can actually be several different types of programs. So quiz shows, competitions, talent shows, even documentaries can be classified as reality TV. Now, at the moment, we do not know which kinds of television shows Evestar produce, but of course, that will become more apparent as we go along through this pre-season. Now, one thing it says here is that personal conflict is a significant element of reality TV, and that conflict may be created by competition or stressful situations arising in daily life. Now, what this says to me is that perhaps some people may consider reality TV to be unethical. You are exploiting stressful situations, you're exploiting the pain of others for amusement. And one could argue that that falls short of the CIMA code of ethics, particularly integrity. Does it really demonstrate good integrity of you to exploit these kind of personal things on television for the enjoyment of the viewer? And then the pre-scene goes on to give us an example of this. The example it's showed is the program The Debt Collector, which follows the working lives of debt collectors, going about their business with one camera following them and taping them whilst they collect debts from people who haven't been able to pay them. Now, again, is this ethical? You are exploiting these poor people who perhaps have very good reasons why they haven't paid their debts, and turning their pain, having their car repossessed, their house repossessed, into entertainment for the viewer. But at the same time, you can see how this program would be incredibly cheap to make. Now, the debt collectors are already employed by the debt collecting company, and they're just going around doing their normal day, and you've just got one cameraman with a camera following them around, just videotaping it. And then, of course, the person who voices over the edited footage at the end. So really, you've only got a few people working on this television program, and it could make you millions once it goes on television, particularly if it's at prime time and a lot of people tune into it. You've got a lot of ad breaks in it, which companies can pay for advertising. Off a very small show that's cost you very little to make, you can have a very high return. But I can already see one risk here when you are filming everyday people in their everyday lives is you have to make sure you get permission. Often you'll have to sign a release contract with the people who are being filmed to grant you permission to show their daily lives on television. And if you don't, then you are liable to be sued for it. It's a possible lawsuit. And that, of course, depends on the laws of Thailand as well. And so companies that produce these kind of programs will need to have sufficient legal departments, sufficient risk committees to ensure that these sort of incidents do not happen. However, it goes on to say that Evestar does not produce these kind of programs. Instead, they, rather than focusing on low-cost programs, they concentrate on prime-time viewing for the major television networks. And so therefore, they perhaps have far higher costs of production. And of course, if you are dealing with the major television networks at the prime times, then there's likely to be far more competition. A lot of programs will be competing for that prime time slot, and particularly if the major television networks are big and powerful with themselves, you of course run the risk of more competition, you run the risk of higher buyer power. And one of the problems with the television industry at the moment is that streaming services such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, etc., or Amazon Video are taking people away from prime-time viewing. Now, in 1990, according to the American television channels, television networks, prime-time viewing is down 50% on what it was in 1990. But ad revenue costs are up 40%. So there's more competition than ever for advertising space, and yet it's actually less effective than it was 20 odd years ago. Now, while television is not going to go away overnight, there is a general theme that internet-based subscription services are beginning to take more and more people away from normal primetime television, particularly amongst younger generations. A lot of people under 20 often view television or view programs purely online these days. So the market for television, for primetime television, is likely to get older as we go along because more and more younger people are switching to online television. And in the next paragraph, we finally have some information about the kinds of television programs that Evestar produces. Now, Evestar generally produces, or tends to produce, studio-based competitions with the entertainment value derived from the contestants' responses to stress and rejection. So again, tying back to that personal conflict that the pre-scene spoke about earlier on, rather than the skill element itself. Now again, this goes back to integrity, goes back to ethics. Ethics, must point out, is one of the big CIMA topics that is very, very likely to come up in the exam and something that CIMA like to test students on. So again, we're back to this question over ethics. Rather than deriving the entertainment from people being skilled at certain things, we're trying to get the entertainment value from them being bad at it, from them being upset by rejection. So again, we're pushing these ethical buttons here, pushing the what is acceptable on television to perhaps the very limits. And another issue that we have here with these more studio-based shows is that they have very high production costs. So given that perhaps the revenue generated by television channels is declining given this move to online streaming services, given that the perhaps potential revenue coming to Evestar will be declining over the next few years, will they have to consider moving more into your lower cost production programs to help with the revenue? Now, for example, if the production of this Thailand variety show were to continue to increase and revenues were to perhaps become stagnant or even decline, could the company branch out into your lower cost shows like programs like Debt Collector to help shore up the revenue, to boost the profitability? We have to remember that we are a publicly traded company trading on the Thailand stock market, and therefore we have a duty to our shareholders, who are key stakeholders of our organization, to produce profit. So you can see we're already starting to think like a senior manager advising the board. We perhaps would go to them if there is an issue with the profit or the revenue being generated by our larger shows and suggest that we perhaps go into the lower cost reality programs such as Debt Collector, because it fits within our strategy, fits within our remit of producing reality TV shows, but it's also diversifying the range of those kind of shows. Still in reality TV, we're just doing a different type of reality TV to help with our revenue, to help with our profit. So now let's look more at this show, at Thailand Variety, which to me sounds very much like a Britain's Got Talent, X Factor type show. And if we read on, we can see more of a description of the show. So members of the public have the opportunity to perform in front of a live audience, receiving feedback from a celebrity panel. That's exactly what shows like Britain's Got Talent, The Voice, like X Factor are. So those of you who are familiar with those shows should perhaps think of these shows when we are thinking about Thailand Variety to help contextualize it. So when we're thinking about what Thailand Variety does, what Thailand Variety should do, or what Evestar should do with Thailand Variety, think about the X Factor, think about Britain's Got Talent or America's Got Talent, and think to yourself, what do these shows do? How would this show do that same thing? If it's unlikely that a company like X Factor or Britain's Got Talent, or a show like Britain's Got Talent or X Factor would do that, then perhaps it's something that Thailand Variety shouldn't consider doing. But it will also help you to put a realistic spin on everything, because we're thinking about a real life show that is very similar to this one. Now, whilst a lot of the entertainment value is supposed to be derived from poor contestants who get stressed or get rejected, as it said here, there are actually a lot of people who go on to become very successful. Now, again, thinking back to X Factor and Britain's Got Talent, they're all part of Simon Cowell's production company, Psycho. And the Psycho also has a music division, and people who are successful are signed to his music label. So again, that's a way of diversifying his business, and the synergy of producing these television shows, getting people successful, all the publicity from this show, and then signing them to his music label and releasing music from his music label. And they're already stars. They're already stars in the public eye because they have been branded, they have been exposed to the public on the television show. So is there an opportunity here for Evestar to then sign these artists who become successful and then make more revenue from them as they become artists in their own right? Does Evestar have a music division? If not, could they have one? Could they create one and sign their talents to it? And we move on to more ethical issues here, as the program's production team is basically saying here that they make sure to mix in a proportion of untalented individuals because the viewing public takes pleasure in watching them receive negative comments, particularly if the contestants react in an angry or disrespectful manner. So again, we have an issue here with ethics. We also have some risk elements. What if the the contestants react in a too angry or disrespectful manner? What if they perhaps say some very offensive language live on television, and that will of course cause the viewing public to complain about the television show? What if they have a particularly sad story and the public starts rooting for them as an underdog, and then the celebrity panel tears them apart, and then everyone's angry at the celebrities because they have turned against someone that they were rooting for. That again may lead to people disliking the show. However, these shows have been around for a long time and people still watch them. And of course, what is also critical to the business and also a strength of the current business is there is no shortage of people willing to try out on these shows. X Factor and Britain's Got Talent are not struggling season for season to try and find thousands and thousands of people to appear on these shows. In fact, more and more people are trying. So until people stop trying to get on shows like this, they will always have enough people. And that, of course, goes back to the ethical argument here, where you could say that people know the deal, they know that these programs exploit people who perhaps aren't talented, and yet they volunteer to go on it. No one is forcing them to. And therefore you could say that they have perhaps accepted the liability, accepted that this may happen to them, and therefore it's not unethical because we are not doing anything that they shouldn't have at least anticipated. So that's a general overview of the Thailand reality television show industry. Now let's look at the greater industry of the television industry. Now, Thailand's television industry underwent major changes in the late 90s. This was moving from the analog signals to digital signals, and this was licensed by the government. So we see here that the government does have an impact, or can have an impact, on the television industry. So that's a pestle factor there. And so the government licensed digital television signals which could carry far more channels and thus increase the amount of channels that could be viewed simultaneously by people at home. Now these new channels were then sold to television companies which were acquired by a mix of the traditional ones and also newcomers to the industry. And this perhaps goes to reduce the buyer power of the buyers of television production companies such as Evestar, because we now have far more television channels to sell to. Because there are more channels, more companies, more television companies can enter the industry, and therefore there are more television channels for production companies like Evestar to sell to. Now, while nowadays there may be more television companies for companies like Evestar to sell programs to, there were 4 legacy television broadcasters in Thailand. And this was in the pre-digital era on the old analog signal. Now, the legacy companies are likely to be larger perhaps than the newcomers, and they're also likely to have a higher proportion of viewers, particularly considering that many people will have watched these television channels religiously before the move to digital. And the next page of the pre-scene details these 4 companies, and these are the ones that we're going to look at now. So I hope you've enjoyed this sample video and more importantly found it useful. Before I go, I'd like to quickly tell you about a few of the products that we do here at Astranti Financial Training, specifically for our case study courses. We have a study text which details all the key theories in which you will be expected to use in your case study exam, as well as details of how to approach the pre-scene and the case study. We also have a series of course videos detailing how to answer case study questions. This is actually an area in which many students struggle. Most of the scripts that I've seen, the failing scripts that I've seen, has actually been due to poor case study technique rather than lack of knowledge. We also have a series of pre-scene analysis videos based on the current up-to-date pre-scene, detailing all the key bits of information and likely issues you may face in the exam. Next up is the industry analysis, a pack detailing information about the industry that the pre-seen company resides in, information about the key players within that industry, and more background information on the industry in general. We also have a range of mock exams created for each level and based on the current pre-seen, which is a great way to get some practice in before you sit the real thing. We also offer marking and feedback on those mock exams so you can see where you are going wrong and where you can improve. Finally, we have the master classes. These are 2 one-day classes taken by our expert tutors to give you all the hints and tips you need to really add to your chances of passing the exam. Also, if you take our full course, we offer a pass guarantee, which, provided you have met all the requirements of the pass guarantee, you will get a free resit on the next exam should you fail to pass. So once again, thank you for your time. If you're interested in any of these products, please visit the website www.astranti.com for more information. Thank you.